I'm Sandy, and I want to welcome you to the first annual meeting of Watercolor Palettes Anonymous. To all of you who have too many watercolor palettes, let's start fresh. I'm going to show you the palettes that I actually use, not all of those that I've had in the past. And this is the swanky one that I have. Nobody needs this palette. Just going to tell you. I'll tell you the story behind it later, but I'm going to swatch the colors that are in it. This is my working studio palette, and I'll share with you the colors that have changed for this year. And then this is my mini palette. I take this with me when I go urban sketching or go out for some quick nature sketching, not when I do full plein air. But you might notice this one's really small, the other one's really big, and there's a size in between that I'll tell you about as well. But I'm going to swatch both of these palettes and tell you about why I choose the colors that I do. I'm going to begin with the mini palette. This one is just one that I can recommend highly to beginners. If you're just getting started, it's a great one. And it's one I use in a lot of my classes just because I want to make it accessible. You don't have to buy a gajillion things. You can buy one set of tubes that comes together. This little palette has gotten ridiculously expensive, though. It's like $120 now. It was way less than half that when I bought a couple of them many years ago. They make a lot more of them. You can see this one. It's a little cheaper. The tray comes out, so you kind of need to put some glue underneath of it, glue dots or something to hold it in. But it's going to work pretty much the same. So you can squeeze your paints out into either half pans or full pans. And you may need to buy those separately if you want a different size than what comes with your palette. But this is the paint set, the Daniel Smith Essentials. And it's yellow, red, and blue in cool, warm, cool, warm, cool, warm is the order they have them in. And don't worry if you can't tell visually the difference between the blues, because I can't either. I just know which one it is, and I've arranged my palette so I don't have to think about it anymore. And those are my extra colors that are just ones that I get tired of mixing. So you could leave those blank very easily. So let's start with the swatching. I'm doing the cools on top and the warms on bottom. And that's kind of across from each other on the palette that you can see there. The cool yellow is Hansa Yellow Light. It's more like a lemon yellow. The one on the bottom is New Gamboge, warmer. It's got a little more oranginess to it. And for each one of these, I'm trying to paint a little darker color on one side that has more pigment in it and more water on the other side, just so I can have a visual reference for how dark can it get and how light can it get. What does it look like when it's dark or light? And just making little circle swatches out of these. I made a little tracing of a circle so I could create these. You could also do squares very easily. So the red on the top, by the way, is Quinacridone Rose. On the bottom, it's Imperial Scarlet. The difference between cherry and tomato red. You can think of tomatoes as being out in the warm sunshine. And maybe that will help you to remember that it's warm. But the blues, like I said, it's hard to just look at them and go, I think that's cool, I think that's warm. Artists argue about it all the time. They'll categorize them different ways. Companies will categorize them different ways. But I think of the cool blue, the phthalo blue green shade, as more like a fresh kind of blue color. And you'll see when it mixes differently. This French ultramarine blue is a color I absolutely love. I use it a ton. And this one is, I don't know why it's warm, except for the warm colors I think of as mixing to make more earthy types of tones. And you'll see when I do the mixing between them how that plays out when you're actually mixing the colors. So the cools are going to be a little more, I think of them as more flower colors, like kind of bright and flowery and cheerful and that sort of thing. So I'm going to mix each of these a couple of times. If I mix approximately, and you're never going to get anything exact, approximately half of the Quinacridone Rose and half the Hansa Yellow Light, I'll get an orange. So red and yellow make orange. And if I put more of the red in it, if I have a higher concentration of red, it'll be a red orange. And if I have a higher concentration of yellow, it's going to be more of a yellow orange. And what that's going to do is make it actually look very much like New Gamboge. So when you think of cool colors, they're not always going to look exactly in mixtures the way you might think they will, because you can turn any color from one thing into another by how much of the other colors you mix in with it. And so I'm going to zoom through this because I was actually mixing off camera there. I am so sorry. But you can see the colors as they paint. But there's a yellow green, a green, and then a blue green. And you can do this for every color. So whatever paints you have, whether you have this particular set or not, you can do this mixture. And I'm drying these off real quickly because you'll be able to see the brightness and the happiness of the purples and the greens and stuff when they dry is going to be different than the tones that we get for the warms. But I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do an orange, a red orange, and a yellow orange, and just go around each one. Now, there's dozens of other hues you can do in between any of these. So when I say this is a really great mixing set, it's because you can keep mixing and mixing and mixing. And you don't have to mix just all the cools with all the cools and all the warms with all the warms. You can mix cools and warms together and try making all different kinds of mixtures of colors. It's just super fun to play and see what happens. But you can see in the greens that we're getting some more olivey kinds of greens as I'm mixing the warms. That's when I said you get something that's a little more on the earthy side when you mix with using the warms. And that's just, what I think of the way these colors mix. It doesn't make a really good purple, but it does, like when you're trying to mix a purple color, often I get a brown that I might like for something, or I can get maybe a grayish color that I would like for something. And having this little swatch card along with whatever your travel kit is might be really helpful in referencing what these colors can do. But you can also take all these colors and mix them together. So I'm mixing the cool primaries on the left half, and you can see it's very purpley. That's because there's more of that phthalo blue in there right now. And if I put some of the yellow in with it, it kind of turns into a greenish color. Put in some red, and it gets much more red. But I can keep playing around with the balance of it until I start to make something that starts to go neutral. Now, with the cools, it can take me a long time to get that mix right, because I look at it when it's got purplishness to it. That means it's got a lot of red and blue, and I want to put some yellow in to balance that out. And then it goes one direction or another, and I'm just constantly trying to figure out which color to put in there. But I can, kind of get a color in here that might be something that I can use for a road or a building or something. And if I put in a little bit more of some other colors, I can push that mixture of those three in a different direction. But again, I'm trying hard to make something that's going to feel more gray when it's all done. And it's kind of a blue-gray, purple-ish kind of thing. So I do struggle with trying to use those in order to make my neutrals. What I do love using is the warms. So this is the warm side, and I'm going to throw in reds, yellows, and blues from that. And I can get pretty quickly a color that's going to feel brown. And you can push that to be more of a yellowish kind of brown or a reddish kind of brown by putting more yellow or red in it. And you can push it more toward being a gray or a gray-blue color by putting more blue in it. And then you can mix all of it together. Like I said, you don't have to be limited to just the cools with the cools and the warms with the warms. Mix them all together and see what you can make. And I got kind of a color that was going to be in that blue-gray feeling type of color. And then I thought, okay, let me add in some of the warms in the red and the yellow and see if I can make a different kind of brown, maybe a lighter brown, a more yellowish kind of brown. And bada boom, bada bing. It's much quicker for me to mix them from the warms. But here we go with the other colors that are in here. And what I always tell people when they say, what should I have in my palette, is you should always have mixing colors, those warms and cools in the red, yellow, and blue, because you can mix everything from them. You can mix black from them if you mix them thickly. That kind of middle section is mixed out thin, but if you mix them really thick, they can make practically a black. Other colors that you can fill in with are things that either have properties you like, if there's granulating colors you love that make a texture, or if there's just colors you get tired of mixing. So I have Sap Green, Cobalt Teal Blue, Burnt Sienna, and Paynes Blue-Gray. Those are my 4 extras. Yours are going to be entirely different because it's going to depend on what you paint and what colors you're tired of mixing. But I would suggest getting those colors and mix them first and see what you find harder to mix or easier. And then what do you paint a lot of? If you paint a lot of greens, then go find a green that you love and have that. So you can make a little card like this that can fit into your palette, but be aware it's going to stick to your colors, especially if they're wet. Or mine have just been recently refreshed, so that's why the paint is creamy. They will dry in a palette. You don't need an airtight palette. You can just let them dry. The paints will re-wet very easily. Now I want to talk for just a minute about a working palette, because that's the workhorse that you might use in the studio versus that tiny one that you might take out. So if you're looking to expand your palette and have more colors in it, these are some that I've had in the past. I've had just a ton in the past, and I like a metal palette. There's just something about it that I like. These have wells that are kind of diamond shaped, so all the paint collects in the bottom and it doesn't get kind of collected around the outside edges, which is nice. I've made a swatch card that stays inside this. I don't use that for any mixing, and I put packing tape over it and then glued it in there. So I did that with both of these palettes. This one has whole pans, full pans, and the other palette has half pans. So you can get more colors in if you have half pans, but I hope I can sell you on not having quite as many colors. Because if you have the whole pans, the full pans, you can use bigger brushes and get them in there more easily. And that means you need less colors, which is why I moved to this studio palette that I have. Now, I could have gotten a cheaper palette, yes, that is going to have 18 colors in it, but I saved up for years to get this palette. I had seen so many of the artists who I admire using a palette made by the House of Hoffman, and Steve Finelli is just phenomenal. He is so good. There's like waiting lists to get one of these. So I'm not recommending this for anybody. Well, I shouldn't say I'm not recommending it. If you have a lot of money and you have at it, go help Steve make a living. But I got this as a gift to myself as I started really realizing I really want to paint. And this palette has huge wells. It has a limited color selection. It has these built-in areas for the color. And what I'm doing here is removing some colors that I decided to vote off the island. Every year I take a look at my colors and I say, what do I want to change? What do I want to keep? Is there anything that I haven't replenished? Do I need to reorder something? So some of the colors, I kind of dig them out and move them over to another of these wells and try to get my order the way that I want it. I generally try to keep my yellows together because they are the ones that get dirty the easiest. And here I had some colors in mind that I wanted to add. What I did was go through my box of tubes. I've been trying to pare that down because when I first started painting, I bought so many flippin' tubes of paint. Oh my goodness, it was insane. And I wanted all the colors. I mean, we all want all the colors, right? But I realized I don't need all the colors. So what I do is give each one a spin, and I let them be in the palette for a year. That gives me an adequate time that I can sit and kind of talk to the paint and I can see what it does. I can try mixing it with all the other colors in my palette and decide, well, I do like that, don't like that. I've discovered some really fun mixes with some of these colors that I absolutely love, and some textures that some of them will make, some granulation they'll do. And this year there were some that were in my my paint box that have not had a turn because I had told myself one time or another that I didn't want it, didn't like it, and had kind of left it behind. And they're going to make an entrance this year just to see. And I'm topping off some of the other colors just so my palette can be all fresh and happy all together. You can see I'm just squeezing paint out into them. They will dry, as mentioned, and you can overfill them because they're going to shrink down. That's just the way things go, and you always will have like a little divot in the middle when you start dipping into your paint, because that's just what happens when you're actively using your palette. But this one has not had a good cleaning in probably 2 or 3 years. It was just such a mess. Oh my heavens. Yeah, it was bad. But I got this silver polish, and I have polished it up once before. but it's been a while. And this thing it gets so used and so loved. And I know that's the wonderful thing about palettes, rather than having them all fresh and shiny, except for once in a while, it's nice to have them shiny and remember how beautiful they are. But you put this silver polish on. I think it's called metal polish, actually. You put the metal polish on and then buff it off, and it just makes the sucker shine. Little elbow grease, and it just comes out beautifully. And Steve will actually put your signature on one of the panels for you. You get to customize what kind of metal they're made of, that sort of thing. What kind of plate is going to be on the top of it with the House of Hoffman information. So it is, it's an investment. This is something that is going to last me my life. And Steve will actually refurbish if, you totally disasterize it. So I'm trying not to send it back to Steve. So I'm going to take good care of this. But it's only once in a while that I get it this polished and tidy and beautiful. Look at that shine. Just makes me so happy. But you can tell the difference between the fresh, clean side and the old gunky side. It, just makes my little heart sing. So, as I said, I recommend having a working or studio palette that's going to have a limited-ish number of colors. Like, I would say no more than 24. Because if you start getting into 36, 48 palette colors and you got a gajillion to choose from, you're not going to get to know the colors you have very well. Now, you may find that out of that 36 or 48, there are some that you dip into all the time because those are your favorite colors. Well, put those in a smaller palette and just have that smaller collection. I almost want to come up with a little theme song in my head for every time I open this palette now because it's so clean and shiny. I'm sure that won't last long because I am kind of a mess. But let's look at the colors that I've kicked to the curb and swapped out for Prussian. I use a lot when I do galaxies, but I haven't painted a lot of galaxies. I will be getting the tube out, but I like using Lunar Blue a lot, so I've missed it and it's coming back. Cascade is going to go away in exchange for Jadeite because I can mix a little French ultramarine in it and get something that looks just like Cascade, but also get granulation. And I didn't have a granulating green. Iridescent electric blue left. It was just so hard to re-wet. I just found I didn't use it much. And I put in some cobalt teal blue. That might not last. We'll see. It's not one of my favorites. Then the purples, I had previously had carbazole, but I ran out of carbazole tubes. But I had 2 tubes of Imperial. So guess what? We've got Imperial. The Aussie Red Gold is so much like New Gamboge, it's going to be replaced by Quin Burnt Orange because I want to start taking my paints to my figure drawing group. I have been chicken about that so far, and I think maybe having a color that I put in specifically for that will make me more likely to do it. So next up is the swatch painting, and I call it a swatch painting because I prefer to paint things than to paint blobs. I did paint blobs in the first swatching bit, but this is going to be making a painting of something fun. And I thought I'd paint rocks. And with rocks, you can just make blobs. And, sometimes blobs will have a hard side to them, a flat side, an angled side. And I just made 18 rocks that stack on top of each other. I was trying to make them so that I could imagine that they wouldn't fall over, and also trying to give them a little perspective. So on the ones on the top, you're going to be able to see the bottom of the rocks. And then the bottoms will get smaller and smaller as we get toward the bottom, because then we'll get a side view of those rocks. And sometimes I made big rocks. Sometimes I made little rocks. Really just having fun with making shapes. If you want to do a fun swatching thing and you don't like doing rocks, you could do flowers in each color. You could do like anything that you can paint in all different colors. Then just do that. Do a bunch of those. You can make a bouquet, one flower with each of your colors. Any old thing will work, because as long as you get the paper covered with the paint and then you'll be able to see what colors you have in your palette, it's all good, right? So I'm leaving some airspace between some of the rocks and then just trying to give them a little sense of reality. When I counted, I found I only had 17. So I had to figure out one more space to put another rock. So I thought I'd stick one out here and then I'd have to kind of tuck it back in so it doesn't fall off on the pile. So this is my Jenga rocks. Maybe that's what I'll have to call it. For each one of these, I'm using a technique called dry brush, trying not to have my brush fully wetted and cover the entire thing. I wanted to have some white spaces showing. And those who have been around for a lot of years know that some of these colors were in my palette way back at the beginning and they're back. And as I said, sometimes they're back because I still have tubes of them in my box and I am trying to get that box down to a reasonable number of colors. Those two are very similar in color. The transparent red oxide has a little more earthiness to it, and the Quin burnt orange is a little more pure color. And the reason that I have both of them, it may be temporary. I don't know how long I'll keep both, but the Quin burnt orange I put in my palette as the one to convince me to take this palette with me to figure painting. Well, it's figure drawing, but sometimes we bring color, and I've been chicken because I can draw people when I'm using charcoals and pastels and all sorts of other things, but I freeze up when it comes to doing people in watercolor. I am determined to give it a shot. And I thought if I put that particular color in, I don't know how long that will last in my palette or whether maybe the transparent red oxide will be something that will be used instead. I don't really know. I just know that I was doing a lot of attempts earlier and I wasn't satisfied with the colors that I was getting. So I'm going to see if this will help. The purple that's up there is my new / old. I had Imperial Purple in the palette a long time ago, and that was a lovely thing to have. Lunar Blue is one of my favorite colors, and it has come and gone from the palette because sometimes I forget to use it. It sits over beside my Paynes Blue Gray, and I don't know why. It feels like it's hiding over there. That and the Moonglow, like those three colors are in my darks, and I'm going to see if I can do more with it. I do love, love, love the way Lunar Blue goes from a super dark, dark, dark to an absolutely gorgeous pale granulated color. So it's going to be seen a little bit more. And then the Jadeite, very fun kind of green, and it mixes well with others. And I'm really excited to start playing around with it and see about using it in context and how does that work in my landscapes. Got just a couple greens, and then we've got some turquoise here too, because got to have turquoise, and playing around with each one of these to see, as I did with the dots on the other swatch card, like what does it look like when I have one of these colors as a real dark, dark. So my next pass on these is going to be using the complementary color for each one. Complementary colors are across from each other on the color wheel. And so the complement for yellow is going to be purple. It's not that there is a specific kind of purple. It can be anything analogous to purple too. So sometimes you'll find that a straight up purple doesn't work and it needs to be more like a blue violet or something like that. And, you can choose what's going to work best for your own particular painting and whichever kind of yellow you've got going. But I'm going to use that for a bunch of these. I'm just putting in some kind of scrubby shadow shapes in order to make my rocks look a little bit more realistic. And you can see, the ones on the top are getting into more natural colors as opposed to just being plain old bright colors. And that's what complements do. It's the same concept that I talked about when we were mixing colors and putting the red, blue, and yellow together to make neutrals. Complements are made up of one of the colors will be a red and yellow, and the other one will be a blue when they're opposite each other. So you're basically getting in complements all three colors, and not in their pure form. So don't take me literally on that. It's not like there's a red, yellow, and blue content in each pigment because they all have their own pigments. That's a whole nother thing. But just in the way that I think about it, when I'm trying to come up with a complement for something, I look across the color wheel and I can see what colors are in the one that I'm using and what's opposite that I can use in order to create a more shadowed version of the first color. And it was really fun to do on this whole thing, just all these rocks, and watching them become more dimensional just by adding these small shadows to it. Now, there's sometimes when you get into the reds, because the opposite color is going to be a green, and maybe a purple is going to work better. So it's more of an analogous color that might be a better shadow for a particular kind of purple, because Quinacridone Rose does not like green, at least not particularly well. It'll make like a brown color when you mix the two together. So I used a purple to get some shadows for that. Any one of these can have some Paynes Blue Gray added if you need a really deep dark shadow. That's what Paynes Blue Gray sits in my palette for, is kind of some of those little spots of very dark value that I might need. And then of course the Lunar Blue, I don't really need another color. I can add some brown into it to just kind of make it more fun, but I already have plenty of dark in the Lunar Blue itself, because it's just such a color with a really wide value range that it can do. It's like those people that can sing really high notes and they can sing the really low notes. That's what Lunar Blue is. And I do love having some colors in my palette that'll do that. Jadeite is going to be the same way, because Jadeite, out of all the greens I have, it looks like Jadeite's probably going to be my deep dark. And it's also got some coolness to it compared to my Sap Green, which is kind of more of my olivey yellow green type of green. Cobalt is going to probably need more of a turquoise shadow, or here I used a little bit of whatever. My palette's becoming a mix of all bunch of different colors, but it's mostly the Paynes Blue Gray there, maybe a little bit of turquoise in that little puddle. And each one of these was just fun to play around with, adding shapes to make the rocks look rocky and putting striations in them and stuff. So you can have all kinds of fun just doing your swatching and maybe learn something about painting. It's one of the reasons why I'm not a big fan of just swatching, because you might have pretty blobs and it might look like a little rainbow thing, but I'm not sure how much it really teaches us. If we're trying to paint a subject, like even just rocks that we don't even have a reference for, just painting rocks, just blobs of them, we're learning how to scumble, we're learning how to add a little bit of complementary color, we're learning how to make some texture, that sort of stuff. So it's very possible to make an art lesson
Now, I
out of
know
something
for some
that
of
is
you, it
kind
is
of grunt work,
maybe
which
more
is swatching your
procrastination than it is grunt
colors.
work.
Because you think, well, I can play with color without having to paint something, because you're still scared of actually painting. So swatching seems like a good alternate. I know there's a few of you out there. I was like that. I would be afraid of doing it, so I'd spend a whole weekend swatching colors and making a whole different kind of swatch system. And well, then I'm going to put them in a book, and then I'm going to this, and then I'm going to that. So I know you're out there, you're procrastinating. So paint yourself something. It doesn't have to be rocks. It could be something else you love, if it's going to be flowers or whatever. But learn how to paint something while you're doing your swatching, and just get that many more brush miles in, because I don't think swatches count for brush miles myself. So in relating this to the whole topic that I've been kind of going on about lately in this video series, the advice I would have given to myself if I had been able to give myself advice in 2015 when I started painting, I would have said to myself to limit the shopping for paints. Don't buy all the colors, Sandy. You will have tubes and tubes sitting in a box for years, and you will feel guilty about all of those colors that are not getting airtime. So I would recommend starting with a palette that has mixing colors in it. So yellow, red, and blue in warms and cools. They don't have to be these colors. They can be in any brand, whatever brand you're using. Great. But have those mixing colors so you can continually practice mixing. And then add other colors to it to get yourself to no more than 18 to 24 colors. If you're going to want to start painting larger, then I would recommend getting full pans, the bigger pans rather than the tiny ones, if you want to work with bigger brushes. and that will make more room for your bigger brushes to fit into the pans of color. Would also recommend just revisiting your palette periodically. I revisit mine usually beginning of the year, every year, and just kind of look at it and say, is there anything I haven't used? Is there anything in the paint box, the tube box, that needs to come out and have some airtime? And if so, what would get voted off the island? And it's just a chance to refresh my palette and see what it is that maybe I want to change up for the new year. Doesn't mean I can't go back to some of those colors. Doesn't mean I'm not going to hang on to that tube of Prussian blue so I can do some galaxies for you like we talked about that many of you asked for. I can just do that from a squeeze of paint. I don't have to have it in my palette if it's not something I use all the time. So yeah, you don't need to spend all your money on that. Divide your money so you can get some good paper and some decent brushes and all that sort of thing. Speaking of which, my poll on Substack, when I asked you which topic you wanted sooner or later, a lot of you said brushes. And yes, I am going to do that one. It was the number one vote. And I had to put it back behind this one simply because I have some brushes on order. I have some by a company that I want to maybe recommend, but I want to get some of their other brushes to make sure that they're consistently good across all the different sizes and things. So I have brushes coming my way. So I don't know if it'll all be done in by next Saturday, but it'll be very, very soon because the order is in. Very excited to get some new brushes to play with. And then we're also going to talk about paper either next week or the other week, depending on shipping and all that good stuff. So I want to say thank you for sitting around watching me just doodle all of this and all the paint colors. You can go over to my Substack if you want to see individual swatches. I did do traditional swatches of all the colors. So if you want to see those, might be easier than seeing them in the rocks for some of you. But I also want to let you know that next Saturday, I will be here with another video. Please do subscribe so you can come back and check that out. And if you haven't seen my other videos on this channel, please do go look, because the series that I'm doing, the first one was all about selecting your subject matter. And for some of you, that might really be helpful information in there. I know a lot of you watched just the educational portion and didn't watch the demo. Maybe you'll watch the demo later, but it was really good information, got lots of good feedback on it. So I hope that's going to be helpful to you as well. And I'm thinking up some more topics. So if you have suggestions on, as a newbie, what you need advice on, let me know. Leave me a comment and I would be happy to address topics like that. So this is just about done, and I am excited that my palette is refreshed and ready for the new year. And can't wait to see what I paint with some of these new colors. Because that jadeite makes me want to do trees. All right, I will see you guys on Saturday. Get out there and do some painting. Create something every day. And I will see you again next Saturday. Bye-bye.